Hey everybody, this is a mini lecture for week 4. I wanted to just say, thanks for having been part of this summer quarter. I know it's an interesting and challenging time just because of the coronavirus and because of the economic recession that we're all going through. I wanted to remind you that the Righteous Dopamine paper is due on Sunday night in addition to all the other weekly materials you're responsible for. And I hope to get a chance to engage with all of you on the hypothesis annotation. This week, the annotation is a little I don't know, trickier. I just couldn't find a great article that was talking about the coronavirus relief and its kind of relationship to bigger businesses or corporations. So I apologize that I gave you a couple of other links that I hope you'll take a look at, just because it's just unclear exactly what's going on with some of the relief packages and who's accessing them. So anyway, I hope you'll take a look at those. Just two major themes from this week are militarism and taxation. When I teach this class in person and we get a longer period of time, we also usually talk about the voting structure in the United States, and we also get a chance to talk more specifically about democracy. But I took some of that stuff out just to give you a little more space to think through some of the things in relationship to the coronavirus. And so I hope that you know, I don't know. I hope you have appreciated a chance to think about the coronavirus in relationship to inequality and some of these other issues that we're grappling with in real life right now. Um, I think what I would say about taxation, since it's one of the key themes for this week, is just that I know it's kind of a boring topic when you really like. I get it's not exciting, but I also think it's one of those places where when we think about why we have such profound inequality in the United States, I think that one of the reasons is just because of the way that our tax structure just doesn't necessarily directly benefit the lowest income folks in the United States. So the people who are lowest income are paying the largest tax burden, right? So the largest proportion of some of their income, as compared to like billionaires, people in that really upper elite sector of society. And then we also know that a lot of times the programs that we have in place, things like Medicare, Medicaid, things like Social Security, don't necessarily do enough to really pull people out of poverty in every instance. And that there's lots of people who are cut off altogether, people who are undocumented, people who are homeless, right? There's lots of populations that don't even have access, and who have some of the most disproportionate burdens from especially right now, the kind of ongoing health and inequality issues in the United States. So I think that taxes in the end are actually kind of one of the solutions. I know sometimes it can be difficult, especially sociology classes. We have a tendency to diagnose the problem a lot and say, like, here's what's wrong with society, here's what's wrong with this, here's what's wrong with that, and we don't give a lot of solutions. And I honestly do think that this is one of the solutions. It's not like sexy or exciting, but it's taxes, right? It's talking about how do we actually change the tax structure so that more of the benefits go to the people who most need it, and how do we potentially kind of reshape what we think about taxes and what their purpose is. I think their purpose could be and should be making sure that everybody in society is taken care of and that everybody has the opportunities and the access to things that they need. I think a lot of times this is really problematically applied across society. And so some people are getting the most benefits, while other people are not. So I think that there's interesting ways to start thinking about taxes creatively and even rethinking or pushing back on what the purpose of taxes really is. What I think is interesting is that if you look at other industrialized nations who have lower rates of inequality, people there do pay a higher proportion of their income to taxes. But that does mean that they get things like publicly funded healthcare or publicly provisioned healthcare. So people may pay 30, 40% of their income, but they also get a lot more back in terms of public goods and services. And I think that it's sometimes very difficult for people in the US to wrap their head around, taxes could actually have a direct benefit and that you pay less in terms of these other costs. So anyway, there's lots of interesting ways to think about that. I did include a link to this guy that I like, who does these crash course history lessons, and he talks about what are all the reasons why the New Deal went into effect. And I think that that can be really helpful. If we look at historically, how have we gotten to places where the tax structure changes and we invest more in public resources? I think that you can look at that history lesson and it helps a little bit to understand where we're currently at. When it comes to militarism, I included something maybe a little different than what I normally do, which is a kind of poem or spoken word performance by Arundhati Roy, she writes fiction and she also writes memoirs. She's really interesting and talks about the fact that the United States has historically been this imperialist nation where we kind of go around and we use our vast military power to dominate and influence other societies through use of force. and that when the September 11th attacks happened in the United States, it was really this moment where, for one of the first times in kind of contemporary U.S. history, that there had been military action on in the United States, and that despite the I don't know, despite our kind of long-term imperialist history, this is one of the more memorable moments in time for people to actually think about what does it mean to have a military, what does it mean to have this presence in other places, and for the U.S. to actually be sort of sharing in some of the grief that other countries have experienced. I think that this is also a really interesting time with coronavirus to be thinking about what is the role of our military, as we, if you look at some of the slides I included and some of the reading from Wright and Rogers, you get the sense that we spend a lot on our military, far more than most other countries who are similarly industrialized. So we spend a lot of money, and that does have impacts, right? We do, lots of people are employed by the military, lots of government contracts, pay for people to be working in the production of some of these military grade equipments. But at the same time, that also means that we don't have as much money to spend on things like healthcare or education, right? So we're making national priorities about militarism. And I do really like the way that Wright and Rogers talks about, well, like what happens if we continue to invest in the military at the very high rate that we do. We just kind of are in this perpetual state of war, right? We're always thinking about conflict. We're always thinking about the military. We always are thinking about kind of our national interest in that global context, right? We're not necessarily in a place where we're thinking, well, how do we focus on improving our schools, and how do we focus on making sure that everybody has food to eat? We have a different set of national priorities when we're constantly thinking about militarization and military expansion. So I think that those are good reminders for us. I also think this may be a moment in time where we are potentially able to start to critique why are we spending so much money on the military when we're not also provisioning basic needs for people in our society. And is this a moment of time where we start to question those priorities? Whew, I've already talked for 7 minutes, so I'm sorry. If you're still with me, I appreciate you listening for this long. I will just kind of summarize this class in saying that I again recognize that there are not a lot of great solutions offered in this book, or offered by me, or offered by this particular course. And I apologize for that, but I also think that sometimes what is most essential about sociology is that you can come away with this knowing, really having a much deeper understanding of what the root causes of something are, so that when you're thinking about solutions, when we think about, trying to move beyond superficial accounts of why racial inequality or gender inequality exists, we have to have some of that foundational understanding in order to be able to attack that. Otherwise, you risk kind of just making these band-aid solutions. So I hope that sometimes you can see that there's a reason why we focus so much on the problems. And when it comes to solutions, I do hope that you will continue to read, continue to ask questions. If you're able to volunteer, even though I know we're in an interesting and difficult time to volunteer, but volunteering for political campaigns, volunteering for nonprofit organizations, for organizations that work with the homeless, for organizations that work with youth. Any of those things are so important and so essential right now. And I know that there are probably ways for most of us to do some of that work, even if it needs to be online. And also, if you have financial resources, I think giving them right now is also super important. So, yeah, again, I don't have great optimistic solutions for you, but I do think that we are, if anything, I'm optimistic about the fact that this is a unique moment in time, and for better or worse, things are going to be different moving forward. And I'm hopeful that as the United States, kind of the enthusiasm that people in the US seem to have for social change and for making things better, I'm hopeful that this is a moment where we start to see some of that change. Yeah. I hope that some of you will take my classes in the future. I've really enjoyed getting to engage with you online and read your papers, and I'm looking forward to your last set of papers for this week. So thanks so much for listening, and I hope to see you soon, maybe in person or online. Thanks.